live. We got a very exciting episode today. We're going to be talking about the best show on TV right now. Not Andor, it's Mussolini, son of the century. Though I do enjoy Andor, but this was a great show, and we're going to be discussing it. We're going to look at some clips. We all read some secondary sources on fascism to bring some historical perspective into account, and then we're going to bring it into the contemporary and discuss the relevance of fascism to modern day Trump and the MAGA movement. So yeah, it's a very exciting show for today. I'm gonna get this plugged in the Cosmonaut Discord and get it plugged on Twitter. But so how's everyone's weekend been? How's everyone doing?
Not bad. Pretty good. I'm pretty tired.
It's 2 p.m. on a Sunday. How are you tired?
I was out very late last night.
Oh, nice.
I was watching Mussolini.
You fucking fascist.
Yeah, I was up last night listening to Pat Metheny.
Oh, that's a good
thing about Mussolini.
Wow, how that is very classy of you. Classy.
I don't know how that combination is supposed to work, but yeah.
It doesn't. So, yeah, we'll talk about the show, but if you can get access to it legally, of course. It's excellent. It's really, really good. It's really, really good.
Absolutely recommend it.
Italians have always had good cinema, quite frankly, and now that the age of cinema is dead, good shows, I suppose. I don't know. It's the only show I've seen. It's the only Italian show I've seen, period.
Yeah, they don't have much of a profile here.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of cinema, I mean, come on. You got some bangers. Pierpaolo Pasolini, Bertolucci.
Well, we should watch a Pasolini for the stream at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think for our I don't know, I don't want to sound like a dick, but for the average cinema viewer, I think Bertolucci is more accessible. I don't know if people want to hear us talk about Sud. I don't even think you guys know about that.
Hello?
Yeah.
I mean,
Pasolini movies?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time, man.
Oh no, it's an amazing movie. But
yeah, it's incredible. Speaking of movies about fascism, that's a must-see movie about fascism.
I just don't know how anyone can sit through it. It's very uncomfortable to watch.
It's about. I mean, it should be uncomfortable to watch because
But no, in terms of the investigation of fascism, Pasolini is kind of unrivaled, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Most likely also lost his life because of fascists. Yeah. And
well, it's because he made the trilogy of life before Solo, which is the trilogy of life is kind of his celebration of sexual revolution and the kind of liberation of human sensuality. But then he was going to make the trilogy of death after that, which is like the darker side of humanity. And Solo is kind of his. It was the first movie in that trilogy. Unfortunately, he dies before that trilogy can be completed. But yeah.
Yeah, he was also an amazing poet. I'm posting. Maybe we can drop this, but I'm posting some love poems that he wrote for his lover Ninito. It's just incredibly moving. Anyways, we should talk about the show. I guess we should talk about the show itself, and then maybe we can try to give some historical perspective, and with our intervention into the F word debate.
Right. So yeah, I've got a few clips from the show to pick out, but
let's do that. That are representative of the history and
Right. So I kind of want to start out with and I do want to say like spoiler warning for people, obviously, but at the same time, like these are historical like it's history. Like in the show, I will say like the show is very. It's pretty.
You know what's gonna happen.
You know what's gonna happen. Like, if you don't know what's going to happen, like you should
go read a book. Yeah. Go read a book.
like some people don't know what's going to happen, I guess, and you'll find out. But, and if you do know what's going to happen, like I don't think that it takes anything away from the intensity of the show.
Yeah, the show's style is also, who it kind of reminds me of? It's like, I mean, I don't want to throw words around, but it's almost like the hyper realism of who's the guy who did the Elvis movie?
I don't know.
Chaz Luhrmann, I think, something like that.
Chaz Luhrmann. Yeah, kind of. It's sort of reminiscent of that, to be honest. Like, there's a lot of moments that are. First off, he's constantly like Mussolini's constantly like speaking to the audience, which is
right.
Yeah. But then there's like a lot of moments where like there's just like cuts in time and splicing with the actual historical video, and it's very frenetic, often in pace, which is like elevated by the music is really excellent.
Yes, yeah. I want to say before we show this clip, like it's very much trying to capture the futurist aesthetic.
Yeah.
The soundtrack is very much pulsing, like kind of industrial electronic music, which is very appropriate because like kind of avant-garde electronic industrial music does have its kind of origins in Italian futurism, and we can talk about this a bit later, but I think we're kind of talking about just kind of makes fascism look kind of cool.
Yeah, unfortunately,
like it kind of almost creates like the vibe of like being in like a Berlin like cool nightclub, almost.
Well, to be honest, like so, futurism was mostly an artistic movement, right? And they took inspiration from what they saw as kind of the rejuvenation of life forces that was given by this new industrial age and by these revolutions in technology. And so they kind of wanted to readapt their media, readapt their style to reflect sort of the excitement and the rejuvenation that came out of this industrialization. So, they were fascinated with motion, with speed. They were fascinated with machinery, and they saw kind of war as like the epitome of this industrial activity. And so they very often valorized war, which is why also many of them were extremely enthusiastic about war.
Right. It's very modernist, but it's also like it's taking from this kind of anti-modernist, not anti-rationalist.
Yeah,
almost.
That's a great way.
Bergsonian vitalism that's kind of in the intellectual era at the time. And
we'll talk more about the sort of philosophical, like grandparents of fascism, in Henri Bergson and in Sorel. And the French had a lot to do with it, actually.
Yeah, that's the thing is you could really look at France as the intellectual birthplace of fascism,
and that's actually a common thesis by someone called Zev Sternhall, who wrote a famous book called Neither Left Nor Right. But we'll talk more about that book, because I think the book we read presents the beginnings of a correct criticism of
right.
But anyways, let's try to pull up these clips.
I'm going to start with this one because this kind of gives an idea of what the show is about and kind of gives the vibe of the show. And also, this is just a quick, summary of Mussolini almost. All right.
Mi chiamo Mussolini Benito Amilcare Andrea, di Mussolini Alessandro e Maltoni Rosa. Ho 35 anni e dirigo un giornale che io stesso ho fondato. Devo il mio nome alla fede socialista di mio padre. Andrea come Andrea Costa, fondatore del Partito Socialista Rivoluzionario di Romagna. Amilcare come Amilcare Cipriani, patriota, avventuriero, socialista ed anarchico convinto. Benito come Benito Juárez, rivoluzionario anch'egli e primo indigeno a ricoprire la carica di presidente del Messico. Devo dunque il mio nome ad un indigeno. Un tipo alto appena 1,37 metri. Un omuncolo. Niente a che vedere con me. A parte l'animo rivoluzionario. Quella di oggi, 23 di marzo dell'anno 1919, è una data storica. Io sono come le bestie, sento il tempo che viene e questo è il mio tempo. Eccolo il mio popolo smarrito, bisognoso di uomini forti e idee semplici, i disperati, gli storpi, i reduci della grande guerra.
Ci si vede a cena, Volpi!
Siamo l'orgoglio mutato in corte.
Sapete cos'è la grande guerra? Sì! 1914-1918, l'Europa in fiamme. 4 anni di battaglie dalla Russia all'Italia. 10 milioni di morti, 21 milioni di feriti e un numero non quantificabile di reduci, di disperati. Loro che sono qua per me. Albino Volpi, pluripregiudicato, volontario, caimano dal Piave. Valorosi soldati gli avevano promesso ricompense, premi, l'onore della vittoria e invece niente, neanche la pensione, soltanto il disprezzo di quelli che la guerra non la volevano e che non l'hanno fatta. Amerigo Dumini, americano appunto, ma ha scelto di fare la guerra per l'Italia. Battaglione d'assalto, la compagnia della morte. In questa ora putrida della pace, gli uomini della guerra senza più un posto nel mondo, congedati su 2 piedi come si licenzia una serva, sono i miei uomini. Io sento la loro rabbia, il loro odio. Ho solo loro e loro hanno soltanto me. E con il materiale scadente, con l'umanità di risulta, con gli ultimi che si fa la storia, si attizza la loro rabbia, gli si mettono in mano le bombe, le rivoltelle e con loro farò la rivoluzione.
Abbiamo spinto a calci il paese in guerra e l'abbiamo condotto alla vittoria. Noi che abbiamo versato il sangue per la patria. Noi oggi fondiamo i fasci di combattimento per il futuro, l'avanguardia, la rivoluzione. Oggi nasce il fascismo.
Il fascismo, una creatura bellissima, fatta di sogni, di ideali, di coraggio, di cambiamento, che conquisterà milioni e milioni di cuori. Sono sicuro anche i vostri. Seguitemi. Anche voi mi amerete. Anche voi diventerete fascisti.
So that is a taste of
yeah, goddamn. But just first off, the actor Luca Marinelli, who plays Mussolini, wow. Just wow. Like,
and you'll become fascist too.
I mean, he's really like, and if you watch the show, you'll see he like captures the charisma of Mussolini, right? That's what was very dangerous also about Mussolini, is how charismatic he was. And he like even gets like his idiosyncrasies down to like a T, like how Mussolini would talk. Right. You know what I'm saying? And like, you know, just performs the oratory just like incredibly. Like he's really fantastic. But maybe it's worth talking about sort of putting things in perspective historically up to that point in 1919 when the I believe it's called the il combattimento di fascisti or something like that. The sort of anti-party which is founded at that Congress, which is shown in that video. I think it's worth going over sort of the over sort of the history of Italy in the 19th century, and then the development of socialism, the socialist movement in Italy, the outbreak of World War I, and the place of Mussolini and people like him in World War One. I think that would be a good place to kind of start.
Right. Well, I think the place to start would be the Risorgimento.
Yeah.
I'm butchering the term. The Risorgimento.
Yeah, Risorgimento, the resurgence.
The resurgence, exactly, which was essentially the kind of the main Marxist analysis of it from Gramsci, who kind of sees it as this attempt to do a bourgeois revolution from above that fails to kind of it's an attempt to unify Italy into a modern day nation state that only partially is successful. And so by the time you get to the 19th century, you have an Italy that is a strong division between a very agrarian and backward south and a more urban and industrialized Italy. And you have a parliamentary system that is very it's very weak. The way that the book that we read, that I highly recommend.
Yeah, it's a system called transformismo.
Yeah, transformismo,
which is basically where the liberals, the bourgeois liberals, right-wing liberals, developed a system of patronage over the South, in which even though they didn't really have strong parties, liberals were able to form coalitions by giving away ministries,
exactly,
sort of bribing the latifundia, or the big landowners of the South. So to go over the Risorgimento. So I mean, the 19th century, it's often called the long century. The best sort of overall history I think of that period is Eric Hobsbawm's three works: The Age of Revolution, The Age of Capital, and The Age of Empires, I believe what it's called. But so Italy, entering into the 19th century, was not a nation state. It was, even though there was a territory where people spoke dialects that resembled what we call Italy today, it was politically divided between many different states. There was the Tuscan states, there was the Sardinia Piedmont, the Piedmontese state in the north, which there was the Kingdom of Naples, which was a break off of the Habsburg Empire, and there were the Papal States. You know, they think of the Papal States today as this little enclave of the Vatican, but back then it had a lot of territory in Romagna, which contains Rome. It had a lot of territory sort of in middle Italy. So it was a highly fragmented polity, so to speak, or it was a highly fragmented area where people were connected linguistically and culturally through dialects that resembled what we call Italian today. And so in a typical process of nation-state formation, the bourgeoisie, especially a kind of radical bourgeoisie led by people like Garibaldi, wanted to unify it. They saw what happened in France with sort of the imposition of a culture and a language, especially through the military. They saw the nation formation occurring, nation-state formation sort of brewing up in Germany. They kind of wanted to do the same thing in Italy. And so they actually fought, more or less, they fought a war of conquest against the sovereigns of the nation, of the kingdoms of Naples. They unified the Tuscan state and the Piedmontese state. And by the 1870s, they actually had annexed even the Papal States, which the Pope never really forgave. It's important. Never really forgave the liberals for that, for taking papal lands. So that's kind of where we're at. So the liberals established this kind of bullshit parliamentary system called transformismo. It was not a parliament in which issues were really debated. It was not a popular. It was not a popular institution in the sense that the liberals put up property restrictions and other restrictions. So it was alienated from the mass, and it was very much a system of patronage between liberal elites and Southern elites.
You did not have like mass parties in the parliament, basically.
No. And
you did have a mass socialist party, but the thing is anti-parliamentary tendencies in the socialist movement had a lot more purchase in Italy at the time, because Parliament really did seem closed off as an avenue of legitimate political participation.
Yeah.
Because it was essentially completely dominated by these liberals, right? And who essentially just had patronage relationships with local elites, which was very much still based upon these kind of local regional connections due to the kind of fragmented nature of the Italian state.
And the liberals, it's very important to understand also that the liberals wanted to exclude mass parties or mass participation in parliament. They were more or less forced in the and we'll go over it, but they were more or less forced to admit universal suffrage, which is very typical. They were liberals historically were not democratic in the sense of wanting suffrage. They wanted a parliament of property owners, right? And they were always pushed by socialist and radical forces give in to demands and open it up to universal suffrage. The same thing happens in Italy. Now, that another dynamic that occurs with the bourgeois revolution is that the liberals become highly conscious that the masses are beginning to organize under the banner of socialism, and they need to somehow stop them, right? So I guess it's important now to talk about how talk about World War I and the entrance of Italy into World War I.
Right. So World War I breaks out, and I'm just going to bring the book that we were looking at onto the screen just so people see it. This is Italian Fascism by Philip Morgan.
Maybe we shouldn't. Okay, well.
What? We shouldn't give up our power levels?
No, it's not that.
I think it's a copyright thing.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I mean, who knows?
But yeah, this is a good book to read, guys. Just to cite our sources. But hold on. So yeah, World War I breaks out, and the way that Philip Morgan puts it in this book is that this was kind of like a nationally unifying experience, right? And it does kind of create like the first sense of a nationally unified Italy. And it also creates the first, in 1919, you get like the first big national elections where mass parties are able to enter parliament. And the hope is the kind of used patriotism and this sense of national unity to kind of bring the popular classes into a common project of Italian patriotism and national unity. But the reality is that the socialists and as well as the Catholics, who have a kind of also have a kind of contradictory relationship to liberalism in some cases, interestingly enough, end up winning out quite a bit. And the socialists are able to really make quite a bit of an influence on a local level in quite a few places. And this leads up to the Biennale Rosso, right?
Yeah.
So World War I has a massive impact in that level, but
so yeah, it's worth also adding that the conservative bourgeoisie, the conservative liberals, led by a guy called Giolitti, who was prime minister on and off from, I believe, 1914 onwards, probably before then, but you'll have to look. They saw World War I as the continuation of the resurgence, because there still were territories in Italy where the populace was Italian speaking, you could say culturally Italian, places like Dresde that were still possessed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the conservative bourgeoisie imposed what was at first a highly unpopular war in order to kind of continue the resurgence. Like, it was not a popular war. Especially like the PSI, the Partito Socialista Italiano, was opposed to the war, right?
Right, they were neutral, yeah.
It's true. They were not, they asked for a position of neutrality, which was very different from the other socialist parties in Europe, which almost all jumped into the war effort. So Mussolini was actually the kid of a socialist. He was a red knight. But he always had kind of an adventurous streak. His intellectual sources were not really like Engels and Marx. Now, he read more like Nietzsche, Sorel, Bergson, and he saw those really as like his kind of intellectual figures. And he saw the war as this opportunity. Something would come out of it. Some radicalization would come out of it. And so socialists should enthusiastically support the war effort. Now, he was called a traitor. He was expelled from the party. And he formed his own party in 1914, which anti-party or whatever, which was basically the forerunner of the National Fascist Party. I believe at that time it was actually the Revolutionary Fascist Party. But, he started to kind of cohere elements out of the military, out of the futurists, and started to form something like fascism as a political movement. It has to be said that the war effort at first was unpopular, but insofar as the Austro-Hungarians started to actually step into Italian territory,
right, that's when
the people came to more enthusiastically support the war, right? And the war itself created this kind of weird hierarchic egalitarian situation where junior middle class officers in the trenches shared the misery with the plebes and the peasants who were the cannon fodder. And out of that experience, especially like the kind of petty bourgeois volunteer officers, they came to see it as this great national effort, this great effort of national unification. And you'll see that the foot soldiers of fascism in the beginning are precisely a lot of these petty bourgeois junior officers, right? Who valorize violence as this sort of act which unifies, which creates the great nation, and which forms the real agent of history. So, that's
exactly. And I think it's important to understand that, Mussolini, he sees the position. He starts out as a member of the PSI. He's attracted to the far left wing of the PSI, though. And he's very frustrated with the more cautious kind of Kautskian center wing of the party that takes a more, a strategy of patience approach. And he's very infatuated with the ideas of George Sorel, who basically takes a revisionist approach to Marxism and kind of says, listen, the ideas of Marxism, this idea that Marxism is kind of like a scientific theory, and all this stuff is just kind of nonsense. And what that all does is kind of just like creates this passivity among Marxists where they're just kind of waiting for the deterministic laws of capitalism to work themselves out for the final crisis. But where Marxism is good is this idea of the final crisis creates this myth. And that inspires people to act. And that's why Marxism is good. And really, the greatest myth of all is the idea of the general strike. And so what we really need to do is create myths that inspire the proletariat to take up action and to take up acts of violence against the ruling class, to build up a spirit of sacrifice and collectivism among the working class. And so Mussolini, this is even before World War I, Mussolini is kind of infatuated by these ideas. And so there's a kind of rejection of reason and scientific aspects of Marxism in favor of this kind of idea of class struggle as a myth for mobilization. And with World War I, all these kind of class categories of traditional Marxism are kind of thrown out in favor of this. And as you were saying, Jamil, like this idea of, the front creating this new culture of collectivism where petty bourgeois officers are, with the plebs in the front, it creates this new division where you have these guys and then you have the shirkers who aren't on the front, who aren't making the sacrifices. And it opens a new division of which kind of creates, this idea of productivism, right? Yeah. People who are working together collectively for the sacrifice of the nation versus those who are, not making these sacrifices for the nation. So you can almost kind of create this new conflict where it's between productive classes that are, efficient and sacrificing collectively versus, selfish union workers who are going on strike for more than they deserve, right? So
yeah, that's and so this core of radicalized veterans comes to develop this sense of entitlement that they are the ones who should lead Italy. They should be on the top of the hierarchy because they sacrificed for the nation. And not only do they develop this sense of entitlement, but that goes side by side with a resentment against those socialists, who sat in the back and did nothing, right? So, and that kind of dynamic will be extremely.
yeah.
I think it's worth.
Because the other thing is Mussolini's wing at first were like internationalists and were like part of like the kind of anti-war. Like Mussolini wrote like articles against colonialism before World War One.
Yeah,
the thing is,
it's a very weird evolution that he does. I mean, you can trace.
There's other Marxists though who made this evolution because the thing
absolutely.
is, World War One seemed like the revolution to some of these people. To them, like being neutral meant like sitting out on the sidelines during this great like transformative like mobilization. Basically, is how they saw it. And so to them, like sitting on the sidelines meant like that you weren't going to be like involved in this huge collective project where like you could have a stake in the transformation of the nation.
And not to be fair, but Benito had a good nose or good political instinct. And he was right. It was a hugely radicalizing event. And he did very much take advantage of it. Of course, in a horrendous and evil direction. But nonetheless, he did take advantage of it. One thing to go rewind back to kind of what we were talking about. So a lot of there's a kind of typical liberal historiography about fascism, which is that fascism is really just is really a product of the far left of Marxism. It's basically led by people like Zev Sternhal, who are who developed a sophisticated horseshoe theory. Really, that's really what it is.
Right? I like Zev Sternhal. I think his book on Zionism is a must read. By the way, I think everyone who's studying Zionism should read that book. But I think his book, I do agree there is a horseshoe theory element to what he's saying, but
so
what he's saying.
So he was an interesting guy. He published this book Neither Left Nor Right, and it was a bombshell in France. Very rarely does an academic write a work of history and it really receives public attention, but it was a bombshell because he exposed a lot of the French political class as having been complicit in Vichy, including people like François Mitterrand, who was actually a Vichiste or into the National Revolution before he transformed into a socialist. So it was a bombshell of a book, but we can talk more about it. But what I wanted to say is that it's not so simple to say that the far left of Marxism, people like Sorel, developed kind of the intellectual groundwork for fascism solely because Sorel was not really left. He was a very weird guy. He was
these guys like they were revising Marxism in a fundamental way. Like they were abandoning like the commitment to individual freedom. They were abandoning the commitment to science and reason. And they were abandoning like a lot of this basic kind of stuff that like we would kind of see as making Marxism. So it's kind of misleading to see it as left wing as well.
He also was, before he turned into a Marxist, he was like a conservative. He was straight right wing. What appealed to him in Marxism at first was the scientificity. And then he had a parenthesis in his development where he developed the revolutionary power of the myth. But then he threw that away again later in his life. That being said, what really concerned people like him was this kind of Bergsonian obsession with life forces and with development. And he saw Marxism, its scientific form, as kind of taking away from the dynamism of history. And he saw the place of the working class to rejuvenate a decadent and lame bourgeoisie, to take back the mantles and to drive history forward again. So his obsession with Marxism didn't really have to do with egalitarianism. It had more to do with seeing class struggle as this engine that would propel civilization to new levels.
Right, he was very anti-egalitarian, actually. Like, he very much kind of wanted to create like a more elitist society, if anything.
Yeah. So that, that being said, Sorel is not really the far left of Marxism. He's not really the far left of anything. So this notion that Sorelianism is left-wing, the left wing going into fascism, totally misleading.
Right, but it is true though that Mussolini, he is on the left wing of the Italian party.
Yes, that's true.
And these Sorelian ideas are influencing people on the left wing of the party because there's this emphasis on direct action.
Yes,
and on anti-parliamentarism.
Yes,
and it appeals to the wing of the party that is dissatisfied with reformism and any kind of more passive approach. And people who want to take action now, who want to fight. And so,
I mean, and I think that at the deepest philosophical level, the real master of this way of thinking is Nietzsche. In the Will to Power. That's at the deepest philosophical level, the groundwork for the fascist obsession with life force, élan vital, dynamism, heroism, action, etc., etc. And that way, Sorel is just cribbing Nietzsche, right? And he did read Nietzsche.
We got a funny comment I want to bring up, actually. I bet Ahmed al-Shara, aka al-Julani, to be called son of the 21st century in history books. You've seen Trump calling him young, attractive guy with a very strong past.
Trump just says anything.
No, but seriously, I bet that someday we are going to get a al-Julani biopic. That's going to be absolutely.
I don't think he has the charisma of a Mussolini.
That is true. But
he seems like a lame. But anyway, so we have more clips, obviously.
Oh yeah, no, because this clip, the one I want to bring up next, kind of captures because I think in the early phase of fascism, there is this revolutionary. They do see themselves as revolutionary, but it's not social. They're not like the socialists. They don't want to be like the socialists. They want to do a new type of revolution because they see the kind of class-based revolution of the socialists as old hat. And they see this as, and then they see the socialists as lame. They didn't sacrifice for the war. They didn't get on with the new thing. They see themselves as more vitalistic, more youthful, more avant-garde, more countercultural.
Yeah, the initial program of the fascists does have a revolutionary component. For them, the agent of social change is not class, it's the nation. But they do want to see, so in that sense, they don't reject class hierarchies. But they do want, for instance, some of their demands include redistribution of land, raising of wages, worker participation and sharing of profits, and the running of industry. They were anti-clerical, they were anti-monarchical. And it's important to see that even though they kind of start in this direction, they shift real quick. And Robert Montgomery brings up the Biennio Rossi, the 2 red years. And those 2 red years fundamentally change the fascism.
We're going to get to this because that is what makes fascism possible to come into power.
We will definitely speak about it. We'll bring up sources of Trotsky and Zinoviev.
So the fascists, this is the first time they do elections. They enter elections. And
wait, you can't show the money and then the shooting,
I couldn't find that one on YouTube.
Damn it. Okay, that sucks.
Yeah, I'm trying not to get us taken off of YouTube again, so I'm trying to stay to clips that are legitimate. But this kind of captures because Mussolini. He builds up this, these, you see these veterans, he builds up this, he has lots of people from the syndicalist movement also get on board who, are interested in these ideas, who see this as a more revolutionary movement. And so, and there is a real revolutionary energy here at first. And Mussolini's, it's kind of interesting to see the dynamic here.
La storia si fa partendo dagli ultimi, lo sapete? Si attizza la loro rabbia, gli si mettono in mano le bombe e le rivoltelle e all'occorrenza matite elettorali.
Lotteremo a Fiume e in Parlamento. Calma, calma, calma. In Parlamento ci lanceremo nella competizione politica elettorale che avrà il suo epilogo il 16 di novembre. Andremo a Roma come siamo andati in guerra e la guerra non finirà finché non avremo spazzato via tutti i detriti del passato, tutte le mummie che avvissiscono in Parlamento e dischiuso all'Italia le vie dell'avvenire.
Esatto!
Andiamo a combattere! Noi non siamo monarchici, repubblicani, socialisti, democratici, conservatori, reazionari, no! Giusto? No! Noi siamo una sintesi di tutte le affermazioni e di tutte le negazioni. Noi fascisti non abbiamo idee preconcette, precostituite. La nostra unica dottrina è il fatto. Andremo al voto da soli come in guerra. A chi la gloria? A noi! A chi la gloria? A chi la gloria? Viva Mussolini! Viva Mussolini!
All right.
Yeah, they take we were saying how in 1919 it was the first time there was actual nearly universal there was near universal suffrage in parliamentary elections, and the fascists get on the ballot and they take a big ass L. Like they take a huge L. They fucking
They did not do very good in that
they
election.
do terrible on their program. They do absolutely awful. So that's kind of what you see. But you already start to see that this this kind of wild political movement that first conceives of itself as anti-party and anti-parliamentary starts changing. It starts to try to take a more official direction. The first step is they begin participating in national elections, and they actually rename themselves from the Revolutionary Fascist Party, which is, I believe, what Mussolini called it at its origin in 1914. And in 1919, they rename it the National Fascist Party. So that's kind of what you just saw. The other thing, there's two things that I want to mention there. One, you notice the little guy, his name is Cesar Rossi. He was actually cadre. He was a syndicalist cadre. He was a very advanced syndicalist and journalist. So it shows you how the syndicalists, many of them started to go towards, or some of them started to go towards fascism. The other thing to notice is you see the veteran and military character of that crowd. In fact, a sign that says Brigata Arditi. Now, the Arditi were more or less the special forces of the Italian military. They were alpinists, and they fought not so much in the trenches, with rifles and machine guns and mustard gas, but they fought with like knives and grenades, and they would like storm places. So they were very much kind of the vanguard of the infantry. They were the special forces, and they saw themselves as such, and they saw themselves as being kind of like the epitome of action. So you see, like the show is actually incredibly historically. It's like really, whoever wrote it did their research.
I know, like I was the book that I was reading. I was like, damn, were they reading this book when they wrote this show? Because it's kind of incredible how much they
yeah.
They got
So anyway, so 1919, it's a disaster for the fascists.
Right, and I think it's worth maybe talking about Dionysio because there weren't really any clips on YouTube about Dionysio that I could find, but you know, he is an important figure as well in fascism because he the show portrays him as kind of upstaging Mussolini at first, because what he does is there's the city of Fiume, which is contested territory in Croatia. There's a mix of Croatian and Italian population there, and Italy basically sees it's kind of almost like a Crimea type situation where you know, it's Italy thinks it's theirs, you know, Croatia, or what will become Yugoslavia, thinks it's theirs. Italy's allies in the war don't help them get it back through the treaty situation, so Italy feels like stabbed in the back. The Italian government at the end of the war isn't like doing anything to like get Fiume back. And so Dionysio, who is this poet, he's a fighter pilot. He's known for his sexual exploits. He's kind of like this epic romantic hero. He's, you know, he's kind of you know, he's almost like a rock star type figure for his age.
He's a total like he's like a Nietzschean heroic figure. Apparently he like flies over Vienna in his plane and drops leaflets, propaganda leaflets. And so, so he organizes some of the squadristi, who are the combat units in fascism. And he organizes some of his followers, and they march on Fiume. And, you know, he coined a term which was huge for the fascists, which was Victoria Mutilata, which is the mutilated victory. So in many ways, like D'Annunzio is kind of the grandfather of fascism, the father figure to Mussolini, and also the major rival to Mussolini in the development of the fascist movement.
Yeah, and it's funny how the show kind of portrays like Mussolini as upstaged by him. Like, you know, he's so mad that Dionysio organizes like this kind of you know, this kind of ragtag army of veterans and poets and just general kind of lumpen and adventurers, and they march on Fiume. They come up to the army, and the army stands down, and they take over for like a month. And Mussolini comes and visits him, and is like, "How can I help you, good sir?" But Mussolini is down, is like, "Oh man, I gotta upstage him next time. And how do I upstage this guy? Like, this guy's stealing my thunder. I should be leading this." Like, he's really mad, and you know, it's great stuff, honestly, because you know.
I never understood why did D'Annunzio fall off? I mean, he was kind of a nutcase. Yeah,
I think he just I don't know the full story, but I think in the end Fiume was like the international, like it was internationally recognized as like an independent city, and so they kind of lost like
it was Yugoslav, actually. It was given to Yugoslavia.
Okay, so they kind of it kind of just got solved, I guess, and the national question kind of lost like the it just didn't become as live. It didn't become like as
it's also a fucking rock. Like, as like Mussolini very correctly admits, it's like you make the revolution in Fiume as like Lenin marching on Siberia. You know, it's gonna peter out naturally because it's purely symbolic political victory. Anyways, the Italians, they send fucking destroyers and all kinds of boats, and they fucking gun them down and get them out of there. So it ends up being a major military and symbolic defeat. That's probably why D'Annunzio became irrelevant, to be honest, because it was people like, dumb as hell. What are you doing? Like, but anyways, is there we should get to the Biennio Rossi because it's super
right, because it's really, you know, after the Fiume incident, you know, that doesn't really bring Mussolini to power. It doesn't really become the crisis situation that Dionysio thinks it's going to be. And so, despite Mussolini's disappointment that he does, it's not really like the thing that he hoped it would or thought it might be, because really the Biennio Rosso is really what's going to give Mussolini the juice to rise to power, I think. And so,
so yeah, they fall flat on their face. First off, it turns out that so Mussolini was chief editor, I believe, of Avanti, which was the PSI's, the Socialist Italian Party's newspaper. He gets kicked out, and not only does he form the Revolutionary Fascist Party, or the fuck they call it, but he also forms a new paper called Popolo dell'Italia, I think, or something like that. Yeah. And shit, what was I saying? Oh yeah, and it turns out that even at its origin, he was getting financed by like bourgeois types.
Yeah, right at the very beginning, he was getting financed by the bourgeoisie. I thought it was fine.
And by 1919, the show shows, I think it's correct, they were bankrupt. They were done. Like Mussolini thought he was cooked. He was going to be a bricklayer from then on, or something like that, or be a fucking mediocre violinist, which he was. But yeah, so they're cooked. And so in 1919, there begins what is called the Biennio Rossi, the 2 red years. It lasts until November 1921. Now, basically what happens is I believe it's late 1919, the economic situation in Europe and in Italy is shit. There's inflation, massive unemployment, on top of already a tremendous amount of inequality in Italy and inequality between North and South. Now, the workers rise up more or less spontaneously. They rise up and they begin occupying factories, and they begin confiscating land from latifundia, from big landowners. And the liberal politicians, the industrial capitalists, the big landowners, they realize that they are losing grip on power. And so they begin funding squadristi. They begin funding basically gangs of anti-socialist thugs to go out, shoot, kill, torture, intimidate the working class and the peasantry that's in motion. And Mussolini, the show has a certain take on it, but basically Mussolini's approached, and the fascists are approached by big landowners, by the capitalists, and the capitalists say, "Here's a bunch of money, go fuck up the Reds for us." And that's what they do. That's what the fascists do. The fascists take the money from the capitalists, from the large landowners, and they beat up the workers, and they shoot the workers, and they kill the workers, and they do the same to the peasantry.
Right.
That's how the Biennio Rossi concludes. Well, that's not how it concludes. What happens is that the PSI more or less doesn't take advantage to try to take power. I mean, I don't know if they could have anyways, but they don't take power, and they negotiate a settlement more or less with the liberal government, with the government, which is a weak government. They settle for raise in wages. They're promised participation in management of industry. They're promised sharing of profits, which is laughable. Like, it's not going to happen.
Right. But the one thing they don't do is they do not form a coalition government with the liberals, because they still hold to this kind of centrist Marxist idea that it's better to not join government and wait for the bourgeois state to kind of collapse. And so, because the PSI in this period still does have a kind of revolutionary centrist position. But and I think there's a clip I want to show, but one thing to keep in mind is that in the elections in 1919, socialists do very well. And so there's kind of a legal revolution from below happening as well, where for example, in the Po Valley is one instance where Gramsci talks about, he calls it a municipal dictatorship of the proletariat, where basically, like in a lot of these municipal governments, the socialists are totally taking over and are implementing a lot of local measures, basically taxing property owners and landowners to the point where they basically are like non-functioning as owners. And so there's a sense among the middle class and the bourgeoisie that Bolshevism at local levels throughout Italy is almost practically taking hold, right? And socialists, they didn't support the war. There is still, the communists have yet to split from them in 1919. So there is a strong kind of pro-Bolshevism aspect within the socialist. And there's a clip I want to show where, hold on, it's where Mussolini he's in prison and the socialists take their positions in parliament, and he's kind of watching hopelessly. Hold on.
And I'll be right back. I'll be right back, guys.
Here we go. Wait. Mussolini. It's this one. No, fuck. Hold on a second. Just trying to get the right clip up. All right.
È maestosa. Il trono del re sovrasta l'aula che inizia a popolarsi dei deputati appena eletti. I socialisti sono i primi. Sono i rappresentanti di operai e braccianti che hanno affidato loro le proprie speranze di riscatto, di una vita migliore, decente, di un futuro degno. E loro spavano al pensiero di vedere il re. Lo stesso monarca che il proletariato, quello vero, vorrebbe prendere calci nel culo. Lo stesso monarca che si prepara a ridare il governo a quella lumaca senza guscio, al Cagoia Nitti, il quale potrà così continuare ad affamare gli operai e i braccianti, ed essi tremano come verginelle al primo amplesso, cercando di nascondere il loro sconcio desiderio dietro un impotente garofano. Entrano i corazzieri, le guardie del re. Per regolamento devono essere alte almeno 1,90 m. Ci vogliono dei giganti per vegliare su un nano.
This fucking board,
Yeah, the king is just so pathetic.
Prende il sopravvento. Ma a un tratto l'imponderabile. I socialisti dimostrano la loro coraggiosa integrità. Il selvaggio spirito rivoluzionario e antimonarchico ruggisce ed esplode tenendo il culo sulla poltrona. Eccola, la tanto agognata rivoluzione socialista, la prima rivoluzione della storia in poltrona. Povera patria! Un pezzo eccellente. Se fosse finita lì.
Saluto gli eletti della 25ª legislatura del Regno d'Italia. Dove vanno? Ho appena iniziato.
Invece si sono alzati e se ne sono andati in faccia al re. Avrei dovuto essere io a farlo. Io l'avrei dovuto fare. Avrei dovuto essere io a farlo. Uno schiaffone sonoro in faccia a quell'omuncolo, al cagoia Nitti, a una classe politica cadaverica, fili corrotti, attaccati come sanguisughe al corpo dello Stato e del suo popolo esausto. Avrei dovuto essere io a farlo. E invece sono qua, ad assistere impotente, come un martire. Un martire! Ecco che cosa sono, signori! Un martire per la causa! Vittima di una cospirazione! Vittima di uno Stato marcio e corrotto! Il popolo ama i martiri e i perseguitati. O no? E allora che si compia fino in fondo questo martirio, perché è da questo martirio che io risorgerò.
Mussolini?
Sì!
È libero.
Come libero?
Libero.
There goes your plan.
E io sono un martire.
Yeah, he got arrested, by the way, because he went to Fiume to see the Annunzio, that nutcase, and on the way home they're like, yeah, you just, what the fuck are you doing? You're going to jail. So that's why he's in jail, looking at the socialists killing shit, slang. That was before the Biennio Rossi.
Right, that's kind of like the beginning of the Biennio Rosso right there. Kind of, the socialists are in parliament and they're kind of radicalizing the situation. And, you have a lot of syndicalists and anarchists at the shop floor level who are taking very militant action, and that's pushing the socialists to take militant action at the shop floor level as well. It's Bolshevism, obviously, is pushing people in a radical direction and terrifying reactionaries and conservatives all throughout Europe, and liberals, of course. And so, hold on, let me bring up a cool picture of the Biennio Rosso.
Yeah, so this is a very typical dynamic post-war, which is that the immiseration and proletarianization of the petit bourgeoisie, combined with the fear of the political liberals about the rise of socialism, leads them to see fascism on the first hand for the petit bourgeoisie as a vehicle for their aspirations and as a protection against the vagaries of capitalism, and for the liberals as a razor blade to cut down the socialist movement. And precisely by 1921, Nitti, who was the prime minister at that point, the prime minister being basically elected by the king, his government falls and is replaced by a guy named Giolitti. And Giolitti actually is the liberal, is the one who invites the fascists into government to run under their ticket. And I don't know if we're going to show a clip, but that's when they get into parliament in 1921. And the fascists quickly start to lose whatever revolutionary tone they were bullshitting people with. In 2 fucking years, they scrap all that shit. The pseudo-egalitarianism, the pro-working class sentiment, the anti-clerical aspect, the anti-monarchical, all of that shit goes to waste. All of it goes to the side for the fascists to gain power in the state.
Right. And even by this point, by 1920, a lot of the syndicalists and leftists who were interested in fascism had already quit because they saw where it was going, basically. But you still, you had people like Cesare Rossi who are still obviously on board. But yeah, this is a cool picture of, this is kind of this is Rosso in action.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
They got the deed to the factory right here, and they're showing off their guns and
hell yeah,
nice badass hammer and sickle flag. So this is going off all around Italy. Workers are taking over their factories. They're taking over towns. There's a sense that Italy is going to go red, and the liberal state is not able to stop them.
Yeah.
And there's lots of very graphic depictions of the violence of the fascists in the show.
Yeah.
You see the kind of stuff that they were doing, which is, I think, probably accurate to the brutality that these people were up to. I mean, you can imagine World War I socialized these people to do all kinds of like really brutal and awful stuff. So they were very willing to, enact that brutality in other contexts.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find that very famous quote of. Yeah, here it is. This is a very famous quote from How Mussolini Triumphed by Leon Trotsky. At the moment that the normal police and military resources of the bourgeois dictatorship, together with their parliamentary screens, no longer suffice to hold society in a state of equilibrium, the turn of the fascist regime arrives. Through the fascist agency, capitalism sets in motion the masses of the crazed petty bourgeoisie and the bands of declassed and demoralized lumpen proletariat, all the countless human beings whom finance capital itself has brought to desperation and frenzy. From fascism, the bourgeoisie demands a thorough job. Once it has resorted to methods of civil war, insists on having peace for a period of years. And the fascist agency, by utilizing the petty bourgeoisie as a battering ram, by overwhelming all obstacles in its path, does a thorough job. I won't read the rest, but but I'll continue after we show some clips because he does a pretty good job of in 2 paragraphs predicting where things go. Or describing how things go, because this was written in 1932.
Yeah, no, Trotsky's writings on fascism are pretty solid, honestly.
Very good, yeah.
I think he captures the essence of what fascism is.
Yeah. But so yeah, I guess it's worth talking about this is the period, what's going to occur is the normalization of fascism by the liberal parliamentarians. That's kind of the next phase. After the Biennio Rosso.
So yeah, the Biennio Rosso, obviously, this is when Mussolini shows that he can really act as muscle, and the liberals, Giolitti tries to contain Mussolini and bring him into, into transform. He kind of tries to bring him into the framework of the classic Italian kind of transformismo, almost like we can kind of bring him into this patronage type system of liberalism that Italy has always had. But reality is it's not the old Italy anymore. Things are changing. I think there's a clip actually that shows Mussolini forming the fascist party. Actually, let's do the March on Rome, because this is kind of the March on Rome is interesting because he does this after the Biennio Rosso to kind of solidify his grasp on power. But it's really more of a spectacle than an actual coup, if you think about it, because he's already essentially strong-arming his way into power through the liberals and the king, and through their co-option of him. And let me bring this clip up.
Yeah, it's worth. I mean, it's the March on Rome is a very, very weird event. It's very weird. I mean, we'll talk more about it, but I think it happens in 22, right? 1922. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Di cosa hai paura? Ma non è paura, è che... Ma perché il comando a Perugia? Non è collegato a niente. Imprevedibilità da vecchi. Non ci vedranno neanche arrivare da lì. Perché non ci arriveremo mai. Da vecchi, il disfattismo è il peggior difetto di un militare. Non è disfattismo, è esperienza. Sì. Proprio perché conosco il mio mestiere, io vi dico, ci serve più tempo.
Italietta putrida, senile, pidocchiosa, patria di castrati, pacifisti e cacasotto!
Non ti permettere,
Dai,
sai?
no.
Non ti azzardare!
Se no...
Calma!
Se no...
Calma! Signor! No, su, fa il piano. Signor! Calma! Calma! Signore, l'atto rivoluzionario della marcia su Roma o si compie ora o non si farà più. Non c'è un governo, le istituzioni sono un pezzo. Il re cambia idea ogni 2 minuti. Non bisogna lasciargli il tempo di riprendersi. L'attimo fuggente che i socialisti non sono stati in grado di cogliere è ora nelle mani del fascismo e noi non ce lo lasceremo sfuggire. A noi! A noi!
È un suicidio.
Come se non sapessi? Certo che è un suicidio. L'esercito ci farà a pezzi, ci farà. È un piano ridicolo, lo so da me. Con il comando tagliato fuori, le guarnigioni concentrate a ore e ore di cammino da Roma.
A chi la vittoria? A chi la vittoria?
Io sono contrario al suicidio. Loro non lo sanno, è tutta una finta. Marciare, insorgere, ma cosa siamo matti?
A Roma!
Fare finta di essere pronti a marciare, fare finta di insorgere. È tutta una finzione che per essere credibile ha bisogno di una certa dose di realtà. E allora, movimento. Tanto movimento, camicenere qua, là, spargere la voce, si radunano, marciano, insorgono. Oddio, dategli di più, dategli tutto quello che vogliono.
Generale, c'è da preoccuparsi secondo lei?
Dipende.
Da cosa?
Da cosa ci chiederete di fare? Se ci chiederete di restare nelle caserme, altro che se c'è da preoccuparsi, eccellenza. Sono tanti, sono esaltati, pensano di poter fare quello che vogliono. Se invece ci chiederete di difendere il regno... Gli italiani sono 40 milioni, signore, e loro a confronto solo una piccola sgangherata marmaglia. È l'impunità che li fa sembrare forti. Se ci lascerete fare il nostro dovere, no, non c'è niente da preoccuparsi. Io credo che al primo fuoco tutto il fascismo crollerà.
Ha ragione De Vecchi perché ha ragione quel generale. Siamo una marmaglia e al primo fuoco crolleremo come un castello di carte. Non si deve sparare.
Yeah.
So yeah, March on Rome is interesting because it doesn't actually break the existing constitutional order of Italy. It just kind of threatens the existing power structures that are in place. Because at this point, the fascist party is a party. They have parliamentary representation. They've made a pact with the liberals because they're kind of serving their role as policemen for the bourgeoisie against, you know, the Biennale Rosso. But the Biennale Rosso is crushed and Mussolini's movement is gaining power. And so this March on Rome, I think, is kind of like a way for them to kind of show their muscle in a way. And
well, the show seems to suggest, I'd have to look more into it, but so the government of Giolitti, so Giolitti is the dude who allowed the fascists to run on his ticket. Subsequently, the fascists betrayed him a lot, and Giolitti lost a vote of, he lost. Basically, there was a vote of no confidence, and he lost. He was kicked up. And the way the system works is that the king more or less just says who's, like, that's constitutional monarchy, I guess. The king just says who's prime minister. So he chooses this fucking mediocrity. I think it's called, his name is Fasca or something like that.
Luigi Facta, yeah.
Yeah, Facta. That's what
he was. Another liberal.
Yeah, he was a dipshit. And Victor Emmanuel, who's the king. By the way, he's from the House of Savoy. But Mussolini seems to be under the, like, delusion or let like the king is going to choose him to be the prime minister, thinking that, you know, because the liberals just see the fascists as just, they have this instrumental relation almost. I mean, they hate the socialists, but they just see them as these dumb thugs who are just a razor blade to wield to cut down the working class, the revolutionary working class. But Mussolini seems to be under the delusion that he's somehow part of them or is respected by them. And so Mussolini gets thrown to the side and they're like, no, you're not going to be fucking prime. You're an idiot. And you lead a bunch. You like, one thing that the show does a very good job of is showing the human quality of the fascist activist. Like the fascists love to go on about excellence and being at the top, but the show does a good job of like demonstrating they're literally just a bunch of idiots who have no intellectual content. The Central Committee is just filled with dudes who just want to hit people.
They're just goons. They're always like, when do we get back to the fighting?
Yeah,
I want to kill some people.
And Mussolini is trying to like steer things in a more official direction. He's like, Io creato un monstro. He's like, I created monsters. So, you know, he has no human material to work with. And so you know, the government fucks him over. He's just got a bunch of goons like that are constitute his leadership. So he does a gamble. He says, what if I take the state hostage and march on Rome and hope that the military doesn't respond, and hope that I create some kind of crisis whereby the king is forced to elect me or make me prime minister. And it turns out that, you know, Facta and others are like, dude, they give a military order to Victor Emmanuel, the king, and they say, declare a state of emergency. Let's fuck these goons up. And the king, the show kind of shows that he sort of is just like temporizing or hesitating. But you know, the show says that, oh, I don't want bloodshed. I don't want violence, right? So the king basically doesn't sign the order and makes Mussolini prime minister. And even though the fascists constitute less than 20% of parliament, the king declares that Mussolini is the prime minister. I suspect that Victor Emmanuel had quite a lot of, it wasn't just hesitation, but quite a lot of sympathy with fascism.
Yeah, I think maybe there was also some backroom dirty deals going on and thuggery behind the scenes, knowing the way these people operated. And it's so funny how they it starts out being like, we're anti-monarchy, we're even more anti-monarchy than the socialists, you know, but then it's like we're sucking up to the king and trying to suck up to the king to get into power. And,
yeah, they do suck up to the king. And,
and they suck up to the Catholic Church to get their electoral law passed, even though they're trying to pretend to be anti-clerical.
So
but, you know, the liberals, like, they try to use the fascists as the razor blade, but then they're also like, okay, guys, can you kind of calm down on the violence? You know, and kind of just because they keep thinking like, well, they're violent thugs, but if we like bring them in the government and if we like normalize them, they'll become just like a normal political party. And then every time they try to do something to do that, like it just makes them, the violence doesn't stop. They just become more normal, and the violence just becomes more normalized, basically.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle. They unleash the genie, and you can't put it back in the bottle. So that's it's very much like it's and. I'm telling you, you guys have to watch the show. It's truly, it's disturbing as fuck, like the violence. But people like Italo Balbo, who's supposed to be like one of the leaders of the fascist movement, like one of the heads of the fascist movement, this guy is a moron. Like, he's so fucking dumb. They're so stupid. They're honestly so fucking stupid. And they would have gotten absolutely nowhere if it wasn't for the capitalists stepping in, paying the bill, and for the liberals to like come in and be like, yeah, you can join us and stuff. And then they basically just pulled like a successful January 6th on a super weak government.
Right.
And, so just a bunch of idiots rushed Rome. And the king was like, oh, I guess you guys are in power now. It's like,
imagine if like January 6th, like they actually did like get like Mike Pence to like get the fake electors or whatever to be like legitimate or whatever. And like,
or like there was a fucking king who was just like, yeah, I guess the shaman man. is prime minister now or whatever. You know?
Well, because in J6 there was like this insane like legal plot that they like came up with to like say that Trump actually like there were like legit like fake electors that they had who were going to like overturn the election, and Mike Pence was going to like say they were legitimate or whatever. And so it's you know, it didn't work obviously, and it was an insane idea, but like they were kind of trying to like do something kind of like that.
So yeah, now, yeah. Sorry, go.
So I was gonna say, like, this does kind of show the real difference between MAGA and historical fascism, in the sense that MAGA is not a mass movement, so they didn't have the human material to actually intimidate state power into, you know, accepting whatever bullshit result they wanted.
Yeah, that is a big difference, you know, and there's a sense in which, like, we can talk about this later, but there is, like, not just, it's just a different civil society today, I think, than what we had back then in Italy. But there's a good clip that touches on what we were just talking about that I want to bring up.
Yeah, now we're in the phase of fascism in power. So
right, yeah.
Fascism, its pseudo-revolutionary origins. Fascism is cudgel against the working class, becoming official. Now fascism.
Right, and the thing is, like, fascism's in power, and you have the local chiefs, though, like, which is funny, they like named themselves after like the chiefs in Ethiopia. Even before the imperialist invasion, they like have this weird like Orientalism with Ethiopia. But you know, they still are hungry for violence, and they're still like angry, and you know, they still want to, you know, relive their glorious fascist fantasies out. But what they do is they create the official militia. They basically integrate the fascist squadristi into an official state militia, and this is how
Sì, camerati, scusate l'attesa. Allora ci siamo. Il capo del governo, presidente del Consiglio, segretario di Stato, onorevole Benito Mussolini.
Saluto al duce! Saluto al duce! Capo del governo, presidente del Consiglio, segretario di Stato, onorevole, che a cos'altro, Benì?
Non farli incazzare.
Camerati fascisti.
Camerati, vi consiglio di approfittarne per svuotare gli intestini e la vescica, perché il bagno merita. Asciugamani morbidissimi e saponi al bergamotto. Ma hai un debole per il bergamotto, Duce?
like a frat house.
That's Italo Ballo, by the way.
Camerati fascisti, porto il saluto del governo alla spina dorsale della nostra rivoluzione. Dichiaro aperta la prima seduta del Gran Consiglio del Fascismo. Ed ora lettura dell'ordine del giorno.
E perché non diamo prima lettura di questo?
Perché non è all'ordine del giorno.
E bisognerà mettercelo.
Con la presente si ritiene...
Perché la rivoluzione l'abbiamo fatta, ma la domanda resta senza risposta.
Quale domanda?
Per chi l'abbiamo fatta sta rivoluzione?
3 soli ministri fascisti al governo. I ministeri più importanti te li sei presi tutti te. E se noi completiamo la pulizia, ci si prospettano punizioni esemplari? No.
Allora, per chi la siamo fatta sta rivoluzione, Benì?
Per tutti o solo per te?
Te l'avevo detto.
Signori, le mie dichiarazioni sono un fatto obbligato. Sono capo del governo, non posso tacere di fronte a un massacro. O no? O no? E se mi aveste lasciato svolgere l'ordine del giorno sino in fondo, avreste scoperto che De Bono è nominato capo della polizia, De Vecchi alla direzione del tesoro, Ciano alla marina, e la lista è lunga, signori, la lista è lunga. Ce n'è per tutti. Balbo, a te chiedo di inquadrare le nostre camicie nere in un corpo militare dello Stato alle dirette dipendenze del governo. La milizia fascista.
un esercito personale, un corpo militare pagato dallo Stato, ma che risponde solo a me. Ti nomino generale ed esigo ordine, disciplina e obbedienza. Signori, noi non siamo più rivoluzionari. Noi siamo tutti servitori della patria e ci comporteremo di conseguenza. Viva l'Italia!
Viva l'Italia! Viva il fascismo! Viva il duce!
E questo è fatto.
So yeah, that kind of captures what these people were like.
There's even better clips of how moronic they are. I love how he was like, yeah, keep Italo Balbo away from a real job, because one, Italo Balbo is like seen as like a charismatic rival, but secondly, like basically Mussolini gave him an impossible job, which was to try to tame a bunch of dumb like rabble that wanted to do nothing but shoot people and didn't understand anything about military discipline. He gave him an impossible job, like fuck off and go do an impossible job, which is what he also did with sending him to be governor of Libya. You know, he was like, fuck off and go govern Libya. Dude is a lunatic. The Taliban was a fucking lunatic, like personally tortured people and stuff like that. But yeah, I guess it's worth talking about what fascism starts to do once it's in power. So already we see in that video that they start snatching up all of the ministries, right? But the truth is that the overall machinery of the state is not firmly under their control at this point, right? And they still haven't abrogated the constitutional order. There's still a parliament. So Mussolini sees, the fascists don't have 20% of the, I don't even think they have that. I think they might have sub 10% of the parliament, and there's a minister. It's fucking insane. So Mussolini starts to push for, given that his popularity spikes and there's something like an exit from recession, the economy starts doing somewhat well again. He starts to push for electoral reform, quote unquote. And the electoral reform is that if a party gets, I think it's 25% of the parliament, they basically 25% of the vote, they basically get majority control of the parliament. And yeah, it's fucking insane.
Yeah, it's just an absolutely ridiculous electoral law. And he goes to the Catholic Church and basically gets the Catholic Party, the right wing of the Catholic Party at least, to support him. And through basically it's the Acerbo law.
Yeah.
It's the electoral list, which gained the largest number of votes, probably succeeded a quarter of the total vote cast, received 2/3 of the seats of the Chamber of Deputies. The remaining 1/3 of the seats would be allocated proportionally among the other lists. This measure designed to give fascism the opportunity to secure an unassailable majority in parliament was so drastic to be constitutional reform. A party barely winning 25% of the popular vote would find a chamber packed with its own supporters. So yeah, basically it's completely undermines proportional representation, one man, one vote. It's absolutely insane law, but they have a militia funded by the state at this point. They they're taking over the unions. Like, one thing that's interesting is they're basically like destroying existing socialist unions and forming their own unions and like forcing workers to join these unions, and even like kind of forcing employers to accept these unions. So the idea of like a corporatist state is coming into formation, which is kind of getting some of the syndicalists even interested. But
and that's something very contradictory about fascism. So fascism claims to be, in a sense, anti-capitalist, sort of, at its origin. But there's always this contradiction between, on the one hand, or how do I say it? In short, they're not anti-capitalist, right? They pretend to want a corporatist state, which is where, in making economic policy, various parties of society, labor, military, business, come together and make decisions. But in the end, that's not really what happens. It ends up being more like the state giving lucrative contracts to private industrialists, which is the same thing in Germany, which is the same thing for the military contractors here. So it's more like the state budget as like a pot for the fucking capitalists to just grab money out of. Yeah. So this whole notion that they're anti-capitalist, one, it's very contradictory even in their ideology, because they never want to fundamentally change or eliminate class relations. They don't want to challenge private property. They see private property as an engine for the nation, and that it requires the growth of the nation requires the hierarchy, which the bourgeoisie and capitalists are at the top. But they completely, like, even this ideology, like, of somewhat checking the bourgeoisie doesn't really come to fruition in practice, because they more or less are just like, if you support us, here's some fucking state contracts. Just here's money. Just do whatever, you know. And they do that in Germany too. So
yeah, I mean, it's about using this. It's about trying to use like a kind of nationalist, statist approach to economics to solve the contradictions of capitalism, almost, I guess you could say. But yeah, I guess it's also worth talking about how other political forces reacted to the electoral reform as well.
Yeah. In the show, they depict that Mussolini managed to get the Catholics on board. The socialists, the liberals, sort of passively supported it. But I think the important detail is that the socialists, they stood against the law, but they didn't actually try to organize to stop it. And I think most of them abstained from the vote. So it was sort of like no one really tried to stop him from implementing this.
I didn't know that the socialists stood out.
Yeah, like that's the one thing that I found really puzzling, was that none of the other forces seemed to think that this was an existential threat. I would imagine the socialists at least would have tried to mobilize to stop it.
Well,
I think they were so beaten down and afraid at that point that mass mobilization would have been difficult. I mean,
right, because there had been an attempted general strike, I think, and it just basically caused a counter reaction from the fascists that empowered them. So I think there was a sense of like they were just so beaten down that they were afraid that any kind of they were afraid that playing their cards would just empower the fascists almost. Like, I think that's really maybe I'm wrong, but that's what it kind of seems to have been.
I'd also read that the fascists had black shirts in the chamber when the vote was taking place.
Yeah.
I think a lot of liberals were. I mean, if they weren't supported, if they weren't, some straight up joined the fascist camp and claimed that fascism was actually the most intense expression of liberalism. In the sense that it was like the absolute freedom of the most excellent individual to accumulate, basically.
Right. Yeah.
So some did, in a principled way, join the fascist camp. What's his fucking face?
I think that comes up later when the electoral law passes, and then they have to run a bunch of candidates, but they can't find anyone in the fascist camp because they're all freaks.
They're all idiots.
They're all violent, brutish freaks, and so they begin to court liberal politicians to come over.
Yeah. And people like Croce, despite their fucking after fascism fails being like, well, we saw this shit coming. Croce was actually very kind of Mussolini is the truest expression of freedom against the demagogic horde, or the demagogues of the socialists and the rabble. And people Gentile, who straight up just joins the fascists. The ones that didn't just straight up join out of principle or opportunity were just scared that they were going to get their ass whooped or get killed. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how they just get the law through, right? I mean, bully everyone.
through, and then the fascists kind of opened the doors for everyone to kind of.
Oh shit! Did our homie?
Yeah, I think he might have cut off.
Okay, well, okay. I guess I can. Yeah, they passed the law, so now the fascists have to win 25% of the vote to get 2/3 representation in the parliament. And so Mussolini's looking for a list of people that can be candidates, and he realizes that the human material of fascism is pretty low grade. They're pretty dysgenic. So he's like, can this guy be a fucking candidate? No, he likes torturing small animals. You know what I'm saying? So he opens the door to anyone can run on the fascist.
Right. He opens the door to every opportunist and careerist, to come in and hop on the fascist ticket.
Yeah. So every opportunist is, they have to do some weird I declare complete fidelity.
Like a personal oath of loyalty to Mussolini.
To El Duce, the Duke. A very egalitarian movement when your leader is called the Duke.
All right.
Oh yeah, no, this is great. This is one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, no, this is exactly what we were talking about here.
Can we skip?
Sono I membri del comitato centrale dei fasci di combattimento.
Wait, what was that?
Can we skip the castor oil part? It really.
Dude, I don't think they show the castor oil part. Do
Okay, if they don't, we'll explain what that is. But oh god.
Che dovrebbe essere il cervello del movimento ed è composto da un branco di cani rabbiosi, capi nelle loro regioni, ma ottusi e dispotici come i ras etiopi.
No, invece...
Li ho liberati io i cani e se sono arrivato dove sono lo devo anche a loro, ma ora li devo richiamare. Entra in scena l'addestratore. Il secolo della democrazia muore nel 1919-1920. Il processo di restaurazione a destra è visibile già nelle sue manifestazioni concrete. L'orgia dell'indisciplina è cessata. Gli entusiasmi per i miti sociali e democratici finiti. La vita torna all'individuo. La vita torna all'individuo.
Scusa Benito, ma esattamente di cosa stai parlando?
Mica ci avrei fatto venire fin qua per sentire sta roba, che è peggio del ricino.
Signori, vi prego, ascoltate la pancia del paese. I contadini sono incazzati, gli operai sono incazzati e tutti gli altri, gli industriali, i proprietari terrieri, i borghesi, hanno paura. Noi non dobbiamo fare altro che dire a tutti che hanno ragione.
Hanno ragione.
Esatto. Logorare il sistema e dopo averlo stremato, presentarci come gli unici in grado di aggiustare le cose.
Boh, siamo d'accordo, approviamo, andiamo a scrocchiare qualche osso.
Neanche una mascella?
No e no. Signori, è per questo che vi ho convocato. La violenza deve finire.
Scherza.
Scherza!
Ostia Benito, mi si è fermato il cuore.
Boia Benito, scherzi da prete sono questi.
Mostri. Ho creato dei mostri. Non stavo scherzando. Le piazze d'Italia non devono trasformarsi in scannatoi domenicali. Io amo la violenza, lo sapete, è parte di me. Ma ora siamo in Parlamento. Ed è lì che dobbiamo abbattere il regime. La nazione è venuta a noi quando il nostro movimento si annunciava come il tramonto di una tirannia. Ci ripudierebbe se noi assumessimo l'aspetto di una nuova tirannia. I nostri eccessi rischiano di compattare il nemico, tirarci contro carabinieri, esercito che finora erano con noi. Il paese vuole la pace. E noi, dopo aver soffiato su paure e incazzature, gliela daremo.
Non scherza.
E non ho ancora tirato la vera bomba. E non ho ancora finito. Offrirò un patto di pacificazione ai socialisti.
Yeah, that's actually a little bit earlier than I thought it was, but
yeah, than what we were talking. That's actually, I think, before they enter government. Is it?
Yes, before they do the elections, but it does capture the tension between Mussolini's violent insanity and their desire to be politically pragmatic.
Yeah, Mussolini is a huge part of Mussolini is that he's just an adventurer. He's a megalomaniac. He wants power, and so he's willing to make any number of compromises to get there. And so he is constantly having to sort of sell his opportunism to this just petty bourgeois frenzied just gang of idiots. And you see that tension play out like over and over between the true fascists and Mussolini just trying to get power. I mean, of course, what the fuck that means is one of the things that I really like about that scene too is I'm telling you, whoever wrote this show has a very keen sense of fascist ideology. You know, there's this sort of liberal myth that like fascism was deeply collectivist and very individualist, but it's a very simplistic take because actually, as a matter of fact, the fascists tried to reconcile sort of the two poles, so to speak, by saying, well, actually, an extremely hierarchic society is the maximum expression of individualism in the sense that the most excellent individuals sit at the top and the rabble listen to them. And
right.
There's a very common liberal theme. First off, there's an anti-democratic strain that runs throughout the history of liberalism. But liberals say over and over again that mass democracy is actually the negation of the individual because it's the mass over the individual. No one takes accountability for themselves. They just sort of blend into the mass. And no one is accountable in the mass. No one is an individual in the mass. And Heidegger, actually, there's passages of Heidegger in like fucking Being in Time. You know, it's just supposed to be this haughty philosophical work which transcends all petty historical contingency. And he says in there, like straight up, like Dasein does not like the mass. Dasein wants the individual to be responsible. And it's like, fuck Dasein. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I mean, this is a common theme in this late 19th century, early 20th century intellectualism of disdain for democracy, disdain for the massification of society. And yeah, it's very much what Mussolini, the shit that Mussolini's on.
The return to the individual. It's that whoever wrote it is really smart, honestly.
Yeah, there's that book, Revolt of the Masses, by that I think it's a Spanish author. I can't remember his exact name.
Oh yeah, that was a huge deal. I know who you're talking about, but
Ortega, I think.
Yeah, he was some monarchical fuck. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
I was gonna say the kind of the series ends with the Matteotti crisis. And I think the Matteotti crisis is kind of the watershed moment for fascism in Italy, where it goes from being a mass movement that has government power and is taking government power and is using government power to achieve its aims, to it's now able to kind of construct what it sees as the totalitarian state. And the series ends right there. But I think it's worth kind of talking about what the Matteotti crisis was. And I'll play the clip from it. But
yeah, I mean, Matteotti was a leader in the socialist, the PSI, the Socialist Party. He was actually the son of wealthy landowners, and in university got interested in socialism and ended up becoming a committed socialist. And beyond that, I don't know too much about his politics, but he wrote quite a famous sort of expose on the violence of fascists, which is, I think, called the year of fascist domination or something like that. And it's a criticism of fascism and more or less a long list of all of the atrocities that fascists have committed, like shooting people in front of their families, killing families, torturing people. That's something that unfortunately we're not able to show. I mean, but just the brutality of the violence of the fascists against not just socialists, but just like peasants who didn't buy the line. You know what I'm saying? And
yeah.
We didn't talk about it, but like, how like Italo Balbo, that fucking moron, is talking about castor oil. Well, it's because first off, castor oil is made with ricin, the bean ricin. So in small doses, it's fine, but in very heavy doses, it becomes a laxative, and it's poisonous, very poisonous. In fact, it can really, really hurt someone. And so what Italo Balbo came up with for a torture regimen was you shove a liter of fucking castor oil. Imagine someone shoving a liter of olive oil in you. It's even heavier and richer than that.
Yeah.
Putting them on a car and driving them around their town as they shit themselves, they defecate, as they suffer poisoning. And that was the kind of shit fascists did. So they're not cool. You know what I'm saying? It's one thing to use violence as a means to an end. It's another thing to revel in it and to torture people and commit heinous acts. You know what I'm saying? In a revolutionary situation, there's all kinds of justification for execution. You know what I'm saying? You're fighting a war, you're fighting a civil war, but never at any point has any socialist tried to justify the use of torture, at least in an ideal sense. Unfortunately, our history is not so good.
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I do see people justifying torture, but they shouldn't do it. They shouldn't.
Principal socialists should absolutely never. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous you have to say it. Support the use of torture.
Yeah, listen, like the kind of message and the kind of vision that we want portrayed to the public is not like being a bunch of mindless thugs running through the streets, like torturing people and engaging in barbaric acts of violence. That's not the vibe that we want.
I mean, it's the opposite of what we want.
Right. Like we want to be the ones like, maintaining like a semblance of like order and peace and harmony.
Yeah, and under normal conditions, ideal conditions, zero.
And, shit does get nasty. Shit gets real and scary, and terrible things do happen. But
unfortunately, that is that comes with civil war.
But the fascists, they make a mythology out of it. They make a culture out of it. I mean, they make "Me no frego" their slogan. I don't care. It's just nihilistic.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Love of violence, and
their fucking like symbol is not like something heroic like hammer and sickle, like the worker and the peasant. No, it's straight up a skull.
Yeah.
What?
It's and you can see Mussolini's riling up his people. He's getting them ready to do violence. But then it starts to get to the point where he's like, okay, guys, like, calm down. We have to be a serious movement and actually, like, do real politics for a second here. Like, calm down for a second. And they're just like, no, shut up. You have to be joking. You don't even believe him at first when he tells them to, like, calm it down. So there's this dynamic where, like, you get the mob riled up and you get them in this ideology of violence. But then when you need to, like, get them to calm down, they don't know how to calm down because that's the only thing they know how to do.
Yeah. What he wanted to do was channel that violence towards expansionist ends, like expanding the empire in Africa, and towards opposition notably the socialists and the communists. So yeah, anyways, we should talk about how the socialist communists responded, and link it to the debates today on the F word. I think we've done a more thorough job than most pundits on actually looking at the OG fascism and discussing.
Right. So I think to wrap up the Mussolini show, Matteotti gives a speech in Parliament where he basically says we are facing a crisis. The fascists are destroying any semblance of democracy that we have in favor of rule by pure, violence and thuggery. And, this government has to be replaced. There has to be something has to be done. And Matteotti, he decides to speak out in a climate of intimidation and fear. And he gets murdered by some fascists. It's not clear who orders the murder, but it's clear that it is attached to people who have positions of authority in the fascist movement. Mussolini is at first, I think the show portrays him as wait a second, that was not a good idea. What the hell did you do? But then he gives a speech about it, and there's a big crisis. And he goes into Parliament to give a speech about it, and he basically says, it's a very chilling speech in the show, and it basically ends the series. And he basically says, well, this is what happens if you fuck with me. I'm the new game in town. This is what happens if you fuck with me. I'm the boss now. This is fascism. And that's where the series ends. And from there on, I don't know if we're going to do a sequel for it, but it does a very good job at showing what. Yeah, Joseph found the actual speech itself.
Wow, the show actually. Wow, so the show he actually
verbatim, transcribed it verbatim.
That is chilling. So the Matteotti, just to add something with the Matteotti crisis. So the show seems to suggest that more or less Mussolini hints to Cesar Rossi, which I don't know if this is true, because I think at this point Cesar Rossi is actually more distanced from the upper echelons of power. But basically more or less trickles down from Mussolini. This Matteotti speaking out, he's got to get got. And apparently Dumini, who is this Italian American actually, who comes back to fight for Italy in World War I, leads a gang of morons. And it's not clear if they intended to kill him or just abduct him and torture him, but they end up stabbing him with not even with a sharp blade, some kind of they just end up stabbing him to death, and then they throw his body somewhere near Rome. And Mussolini makes a great big hoopla of, we're searching for him. Eventually people find his body, Matteotti's body, and it's a big crisis, and people think the fascist regime is going to collapse, and Mussolini's uncertain. And then, he gives this speech where he basically says, more or less, he says, I created the environment for this. So if you want to get rid of me, get rid of me. And the parliament sits in silence. No one says anything. And that's the end of the show. I think he looks at the screen, and what does he say? He says something. I forget what he says. Silencio. I think he says something like that. It's chilling. And then past that, it's Mussolini goes on overdrive, rebuilds the state in his image. Government policy becomes his fucking caprice, whatever capricious thought he has, that's government policy.
Yeah, there's basically it would be cool if they do another season exploring the actual Mussolini in power, because now he's basically in a position where he can remold this, actually create a fascist state form, going from an actual fascist movement that's in an uneasy coalition with the liberals and has power in the streets, starting to have power in the state, to now is able to destroy all opposition and construct what they self-described as a totalitarian state. And it's funny, my old buddy Jack Devani just happened to come across the stream. And
well, what's up, Jack? It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Jack. I'm glad you're listening in.
Yeah, we just had a long conversation about fascist ideology, the origins of fascism, fascism out of power, fascism becoming official, fascism getting in power, and it's been kind of depressing.
All through the lens of an amazing TV show that everyone should watch.
Which everyone should watch, yeah. But anyway, so I guess we should. I should start yelling at each other now about.
Yeah, me and you have kind of had a disagreement about how much this whole idea of fascism relates to the concept of, relates to Trump and MAGA, and so to lay my cards out on the table, like I am increasingly fine with just saying that like MAGA is a fascist movement. I don't think that like it's successfully like created a fascist state in the United States yet. But I do think that like if we're going to like see fascism as something that has like a class basis beyond just its original like origination in Italy, right? I think there is something to fascism and Trump that we're seeing. And I think I guess to differentiate, you have fascism as like a state form, right? Like an actual like fascist state where you have a break with constitutional liberalism, and you kind of have this like corporatist state that eliminates like any kind of like liberal parliamentarism in favor of I guess like kind of like what they called it the behemoth state, right? And that's like what you see in like Italy and Nazi Germany. And I'm not saying that we have like that in the United States, but like we do like, there is fascism like as a mass movement and fascism as an ideology. And I think those are three separate but related things, right? And I think like when I say like fascism is relevant today, I think it's relevant in the sense that like MAGA as a kind of modern mass movement, I think is basically like a fascist movement that is like starting to influence the modern state and push things in a fascist direction. And I guess that would kind of be my thesis.
Carlos, what do you think?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, but what I would say that the very first point that I would make is that fascism is purely historical. I think like you have neo-fascist movements, but it's not fascist per se, like in the sense that fascism is a mass movement. It is a movement of like, it's a movement of getting, like a mass of people sort of riled up and moving. The neo-fascisms afterwards have been more or less like parliamentary, like, in Italy or, AFD in Germany, or even MAGA. I would say that you would be straining the definition, since MAGA is not a mass movement per se. Like it's not mobilizing anybody. It's sort of just creating. It's. I think you refer to it as a media phenomenon, and I would say that MAGA is more of a media phenomenon, and that's also the reason why, for example, MAGA, or whatever you want to call it, why it found it so difficult to actually do what it tried to do in January 6th, a successful coup, is because it had no basis for it. I mean, it had no basis in the state. It had no mass movement to sort of push the question from below, and so. You sort of just got left with the spectacle of a fizzled coup.
Right.
I do think, though, what I will say is that I wouldn't call it fascism, but it certainly rhymes in the sense that now that MAGA has, now that Trump and his cronies have taken state power, they do have the ability to form the basis for an exceptional, like a state of exception, basically, where they can, begin to implement whatever plans they have for the state.
Yeah, I mean, so here's my take. One, we have to ask, why does this debate matter? The reason that it matters is because we're diagnosing a problem, we're naming a problem, and so we're suggesting solutions. Now, in terms of solutions, the only data we have to work off of is the past, right? So when we say something is fascist, not only are we diagnosing a problem, we're saying that we should respond to the problem in a way analogous to how we should have responded in the past, right? Now, I'll come back to that point. Secondly, we have to be, people love throwing this word around, but we have to be clear about what we mean by fascism. Otherwise, it's just back and forth, interminable discussion. Who knows what the fuck the point is? So, one, fascism is an ideology. I think it's fair to say that Trumpism, that the MAGA movement, really the only point at which they converge or have an ideology analogous to fascism is this emphasis on the nation, I guess. But they have a very different understanding. The average MAGA whatever has a very different understanding of the nation than how a fascist would think about it, right? We can get back to that. Secondly, there's fascism as a mass movement. Let's say fascism fascism in terms of its class character. There's an analogy here. Fascism is kind of this weird coalition between industrialists, latifundia, and its great mass basis, which is the petty bourgeoisie, the desperate petty bourgeoisie, and the lumpen proletariat. That actually is analogous to the Trumpist phenomenon. There's some indication that, yeah, the mass, the real mass, the mass human material of the MAGA movement is like petty bourgeois. I mean, their average salary is like $70,000. That's well above, the poverty line. That's well above the average. So there's that aspect. However, in terms of its character as a mass movement, of course, civil society today is very different. And a lot of the links are not made literally on the ground, building organizations in space and like a contiguous space, but online. Trumpism as a mass movement is very diffuse in that way. It is very much a media. It is very much a media phenomenon. That's how people relate. They relate through Andrew Tate and fucking Theo Von, whatever.
Theo Von, yeah, Joe Rogan.
These dipshits. That's how they cohere, right? Now, finally, fascism as a consequence of capitalist dynamics. I posted a quote. Capitalism enters into all kinds of crises, not just economic. The capitalist state enters into certain crises. And fascism, in a way, emerges at a point where the normal mechanisms for establishing control or continuity sort of collapse or are in danger. I think that this is really the aspect in which Trumpism emerges. And I think, Donald, you pointed this out to me yesterday. I think this is really where the analogy is most important, is that MAGA is responding to certain crises of American imperialism. They see the rise of China. They see the fact that Europe is an economy just as large as America. It's not easily controlled. They see these problems. They see that they're an empire in decline. And they want to counteract it, especially the tech dudes and the fucking the industrialists. They support Trump because they want to push back against this dynamic. And if they use the frenzied petty bourgeoisie to smash any opposition, then so be it, right? So I think bottom line, one, call it whatever, call it fascism. It's clearly not exactly fascism, like literally it can't be.
Well, yeah, exactly. Nothing is going to be exactly like
you know,
Italian fascism.
It has.
And the thing is like the crisis of Italy in World War I and the level of crisis and the level of social dislocation of class conflict is not the same as what we have in the United States. And that's why the level of violence and the level of repression that we're seeing from Trump is not the level of Mussolini.
Because we're also, also fascism gains literal support from the bourgeoisie, because it is a razor blade that can be wielded against a revolutionary or an organized proletariat. And quite frankly, there is neither a revolutionary, much less an organized proletariat. So that is a major difference as well in terms of political dynamics. But here's the final point that I am going to say to kind of push back against building a strategy on the basis of that analogy. The main issue is this. If we call it fascistic, we have to adopt a strategy that is analogous to what we would have adopted in the 1920s and 30s. That means, on the one hand, the United Front, which means uniting with reformist socialist forces in order to create a program and an organization to fight back against fascism. And on the other hand, we would need to strap up. We would need to develop defensive militia. Now, that's something that I don't like about the liberal hysteria. On the one hand, for socialists, we can't implement a united front. We're not even standing on our own 2 feet organizationally. What the hell does a united front even mean today? There is no real distinction between revolutionaries and reformists, because neither one are an effective force. So what it would mean, if we really fall into making this analogy too strongly, is tailing the fucking Democrats. Because what the hell does unity with the Democrats mean if we aren't even on our own 2 feet? It really effectively means tailism. And these are the motherfuckers who got us here. And these are the motherfuckers who are doing nothing to resist Trump. They will precisely fuck over any principled attempt to fight back against this. On the other hand, these dipshit libs are going to scream the F word, and they're not going to strap up. That's what it means. We need defensive militia then. We need armed.
In actual fact, if you accept the premise that this is a fascist regime, then the immediate task of the socialist movement, or whatever the hell is left of it, is to begin organizing self-defense organizations and rally whatever's left of the independent. If you don't have them, build them, but whatever's left of the independent organizations of the working class behind, like a movement in opposition to fascism. The fact that today, I'll use DSA. Within DSA, you have people arguing precisely popular frontist politics should be a very big fucking signal of what's happening with the whole fascism debate. It's a cudgel essentially.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because, call it fascist or not, our immediate tasks don't change. We need an independent fucking organization with a principled Marxist program. Nothing changes in that sense. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. Certain things do change.
Okay. I agree with a lot of what you just said, but I think the problem is I agree with what Jack said here, is that it's been 100 years since the original fascists and since the original Marxist response to fascism. And I agree that how Trotsky and Thalheimer and a lot of these people suggested we respond to fascism was correct for this time, but we live in a very different world where we don't have a workers movement that we are able to mobilize to for the question of having to organize united fronts to defend workers unions against fascist squads is not really the question that we're facing today. I think the strategic conclusions that we draw from whether or not Trump is fascist are going to be a lot different than the strategic conclusions we would draw from a fascism in an era where there is live communist and socialist parties, I think.
But you do agree that more or less the immediate task is that we need to build a principled Marxist.
Yeah, no, I of course I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's then in a way it's kind of who it matters to
I think there are questions we have to ask though, because part of why Trump and MAGA have been able to capture the public imagination is because they've kind of posed themselves as an oppositional countercultural force.
Yeah, that I agree with.
And that is what the left has failed to do.
Yeah.
The left has essentially put itself in a position where we're seen as kind of handmaidens of the ruling class.
Yeah.
We don't have the countercultural energy that we had in, say, the 1960s and 70s, because we essentially have become, at least the mainstream left has essentially kind of become part of the ruling bureaucracy in a lot of ways, or it's seen as part of the ruling bureaucracy and the narrative of the public. And so I think part of how we challenge fascism is, there's also a cultural question of how we fight back, and how do we take the kind of countercultural energy of MAGA from under its feet? How do we build a movement that can take the kind of oppositional energy of Trump that they've been able to frame themselves as holding against liberalism, and take that away from them? How do we show that these guys are not really the cutting edge of opposition to the establishment, but are just the establishment in a new face? There's a
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Right, go for it.
No, I was going to say that what you're saying, the culture comfort, the cultural struggle, right? That's sort of putting the cart before the horse, because
right. Oh yeah, you're right.
In a sense, what that's actually posing is a question of building an organization, building a movement that can actually pose a cultural question on a mass basis. Right. So we're back to the original question: what kind of organization do we need to build?
Yeah.
And we should be building it right fucking now. Like that. Yeah. That's what I would say, is that the left has been consumed with secondary questions, I think, and particularly, and I'm going to use, again, DSA as an example, because that's the organization I'm a member of. We're concerned mostly with, well, how do we build a movement out of the carcass of the Democratic Party? An institution that's tied to a state that's quickly decomposing. So what we need to be doing is getting serious about building an opposition movement that's independent of all state institutions and the Democratic Party. Yeah. And people are going to say, I can already hear what people are going to say, which is like, well, you want to leave the Dems, like no one's going to listen, or who likes socialists or whatever. But the point is that is not an excuse for doing nothing. You have to start.
Yeah, and now is the opportunity.
Yeah, but it's true.
The moment we start importing scary terms like fascism, we're giving more or less, whether we like it or not, no matter how nuanced we are, ammunition to liberals to say, shut the fuck up and vote. That's it. That's what it's going to do. That is the effective conclusion that's going to come out of this naming. So I'm really.
But what do we call it then? I mean, because
Trumpism. It's fucking
Trumpism.
It's Trumpism, or as a generic term, reactionary populism. I think
it's a
finisher's mind,
and that is a tried and true American tradition. You know, we were talking about this before. How in many ways Trump's utilization of power is a qualitative shift, but it's also an intensification of existing trends, of the creation of a fucking monarchical presidency. Like,
no, I agree with all that. I agree that like all this stuff is existing trends in the U.S.
Even at its origin, with the Federalist Papers, et cetera, people like to quote Macron, people miss the figure of the king, right? And the presidency was seen as kind of having a monarchical power, right? It's only got worse with that time. The deportations, they're horrible. One of the things that's first off, the deportation machine has been utilized in American history throughout it. The Palmer raids deported hundreds of radicals during World War I. Of course, that's a very long time ago. But since the 1990s, there's been a ramp up in the deportation machinery developed by people like Bill fucking Clinton. ICE was created by Bush. The War on Terror created every mechanism to do exactly this. Obama deported 5 million fucking people. That's insane. 5 million people. That's half New York. He deported 5 million people. You know, you think that citizens didn't get deported in the 5 million? Of course they did. So it's
right, but I mean, genocides were committed by Germany before Adolf Hitler took power too. I mean, it's
but okay. Like first off, there it's kind of like it's kind of fallacious to make that comparison because the scale truly is different. I mean, like the scale and the manner truly were different between, for instance, the massacres in West Africa and what was done to communist, Roma, disabled.
Right. Then and that's what I'm saying though, is like I feel like the way things are going, the way that this frenzied nationalist, irrationalist, populist movement that is backed by big capital but has its own autonomous petty bourgeois base that's trying to erode any semblance of democratic rights that exist in this country without any kind of strong left-wing opposition. It's not, the thing is, it's not reacting to a socialist movement that's threatening to Bolshevize America. That's correct. What it's reacting to is the decline of the United States as an imperial power with the threat of China as an imperial peer competitor. It's an atavistic movement that's looking to the past of America and bringing back all the most reactionary and horrid shit from our past as an arsenal in order to revive the country in the face of what they see as a decline, in the face of a kind of liberal, a woke liberal kind of malaise. And in their mind, like, the woke liberals are the communist Bolshevik threat that they have to destroy, basically. Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously different from classical fascism, and there's a lot of ways in which it's a farce of fascism. It's kind of a parody of fascism. But I think that, like, it's possible to, like, see it as a fascist movement without, like, drawing the liberal conclusions. I think like, you can, I think it's and maybe it's not worth it. Maybe it's just, you know, giving.
No, listen, this is the thing. From a quote unquote scientific point of view, it's important to realize the similar dynamics that give rise to similar ideologies and similar mass movement dynamics. It's not a pure coincidence. There is something ahistorical in the capitalist dynamic that generates these political and economic crises and that creates reactionary movements with insane ideas. That dynamic is there, okay? We can use precisely the data of the past to come to try to understand what's going on. But in terms of a political aesthetic, it's not helpful to call it fascist. We should call it Trumpism, right? We should not give ammunition to liberals to make us tail. Our immediate goal has to be build a mass organization, build a principled opposition, fucking show the heads of MAGA for the charlatans they are, show that they are in fact a continuation of everything horrible, an intensification of everything that worsens people's lives. And case in point, that's it. I mean, at that point, if we want to have academic debate, is it it's important, but it's kind of not.
What I would add to your, like, strategic prescription is, and what you mentioned earlier, is, like, if there are new organizations, like working class organizations, it's our responsibility to build them.
Yeah,
like, we have to build them. We can't just say, well, we can't just wait for them to spontaneously emerge either. We have to be actively building them.
Yeah. Right. I mean, my strategic, I mean, if MAGA is fascism, my strategic assessment isn't, like, different. Like, my strategic assessment is we need to build an independent organization that can steal the oppositional energy that fascism is basically taking up. Like,
yeah, well, then, I mean, at that point, I call it X, you call it Y, and then we think that we should do the same thing. The debate is
right.
Moot, right? You know what I'm saying? That's another thing about the F word debate is, like, it's kind of moot. But when I see, I'm sorry, the other thing is I have an emotive reaction because I see people like Mehdi Hassan, who's a shithead, go on Democracy Now! And start calling, oh, fascism is here. I want to just fucking, I mean, come on. My head wants to explode.
Like, if that was actually the case, you wouldn't be able to go on TV and say that.
Yeah. Also, it's like Mehdi Hassan, put your money where your mouth is then. Strap up. Get an A.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, I get it. You know, you have people like Jason Stanley and those people who are, like, leaving the country because it's not safe anymore.
Have you read his book?
No, I'm not going to waste my time.
It is a banality. There's no real historical analysis. It basically reduces fascism to just talk about the other or talk
right.
About
and, you know,
it's like, what? Like, this, and, like, I love how he, like, was like, I'm exiling because fascism, but really what it is
exiling.
You got a better
exiling to Canada as if Canada would be safe.
Yeah.
Like they would be annexed or something by the United States.
Better fucking tender position at University of Toronto. It's like, dude, if it's fascism, shouldn't you, like, stay, like, pick up arms and fight? No.
Right. That's the thing is, like, I just think, like, we need to fight back against what's happening.
I mean, I remember being with family members, like, on election night, like, how could you not vote against this? This is fascism. I'm like, just shut the fuck up. You guys have.
I mean, I see the Democrats as complicit in what's happening. Completely complicit. Just like they were complicit. The liberals are just completely complicit in the rise of Mussolini.
Actually, they're more complicit in a way. Like, Trump is like, here's a horrible bill where we throw 2-year-olds in cages and then throw the cage at the wall or whatever. And the Democrats like, yeah, sure. That's, fuck
But
it.
I think it's interesting that like Bernie and AOC are doing their rallies against Trump. They're not calling him a fascist. They're calling him an oligarch, which I think is kind of interesting. Is that like what we should be going with? Like, is that a better frame? Like
I personally think that's inane because
call it what it is. The rule of capital. Capitalists. Your mother boss.
Oligarchy is like what we already had. I feel like Trump is like oligarchy, like taking up
supposed to be the takeaway from the oligarchy. Is it back our oligarchs against their oligarchs?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, at this point, if people haven't realized, AOC and Bernie are cooked. And as much as it's like good to see people out there trying to resist in whatever way, like I applaud people going out there. They want something. They want to resist something. Their politics is beyond a dead end. It's like, let's take all the energy that we could invest in opposing this and just dump it back into this literal geriatric unit of a quote unquote party, which is not even a party, because I can't go to the Democratic headquarters in my fucking local area and do anything really. There's no, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's no like Democratic club. You know what I'm saying? It's just a ballot line where you fucking just mark a letter every 4 years or 2 years for some asshole whose money and financing, you have no idea where it came from or what they're about. I mean, it's not a party. Oh, one thing I did want to say is I think we have a comrade here who's I don't know if you're Polish, but when people talk about fascistic in Europe, then I'm a lot more like, okay, yeah, there's really something, because they literally often descend straight up from fascism. Like Jean-Marie Le Pen, it's not controversial to say he's a fascist. He was literally a fascist. He supported Vichy. He's an anti-Semite, and he was an extreme imperialist who was a parachutist in Algeria, which means he personally tortured people. So talking about him being a fascist or fascistic is like not controversial in the least. And in fact,
but what do you make of the fact that there are like ideological fascists in the Trump camp now who are like, definitely like kind of integrated into that world? Like, you have,
it's clearly significant because you've got idiots singing Hail
like
Hitler.
that Bronze Age pervert guy. His book is like every Trump staffer has a copy of that, and they're all reading Curtis Yarvin. And
well, the neo-reactionary movement is as you know, I mean, we did a whole investigation into it. It's its own thing, right?
It's different from classical fascism, but all these kind of anti-democratic, elitist, irrationalist, Nietzschean ideas, and they're all floating around the Trump administration. There's the ideology is there, the mass movement aspect. The thing is like you could say the same that like modern day socialism really isn't a mass movement in the sense that like
it's not
old school socialism wasn't. I mean, you could say that like DSA does have like in-person civil society stuff, but like modern day socialism is also very much an online thing. We met each other online. We know each other. You guys knew each other in person, but like I know you guys through online. Cosmonaut is an online thing. Like, modern day civil society or whatever we want to call it, this kind of cybernetic, like, whatever we want to call this modern, world we live in, like, we're in a new terrain, and the right so far has been a lot better at using it to its advantage, partly because this new terrain was designed by them. So they're going to be better at using it for what they need. But
don't forget also that the right has especially in this form, has a much lower barrier for organizing. They basically just need to create chaos. That's really what they're about. It's very easy to keep people dispersed, to keep people alienated. That's just more of the same. It's a lot harder to literally physically get people together, building real effective bonds, gaining real organizational experience. Their bar for their organization is much lower than ours. It's basically just fucking look at Andrew Tate talk about doing heinous shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's organizing. For us, the bar is a lot higher, unfortunately. And I agree that there have been fundamental transformations in civil society. There's no doubt behind that.
Yeah. it's something that's been really bothering me lately, because it's like, so how do we like actually do class politics in a world where class identity isn't something that's so straightforward,
or maybe
like identity formation is more mediated through this kind of cybernetic digital world. And
yeah, I mean, also straight up in the sense that, like, well, I mean, if you're at work, you're still in a physical, mostly for workers.
No, the class antagonisms in the class structure are still very much at work as much as ever. Class is still as relevant as ever, but the way that class identity plays out politically doesn't really function like it did in like the early 19th century.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, the truth is that there's going to be more of an onus on developing class consciousness through digital technology. It's just really like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's why now more than ever we need media, right? We need
more shows like this.
Go be posting for socialism. Go post for socialism. But like, honestly, like that, I think that is just the case. There's going to be an outsized role. I mean, that's why we started this shit. You know what I'm saying? We started the video format because no one reads, or not no one, but like 8 people read. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, you do need that media, like that media sphere.
But I will say,
fire in that sense.
To get back to what you were saying about, like, in the first Trump administration, you had a bunch of weirdos hanging around Trump.
Right, but you didn't have the alliance with like the big tech people yet.
Yeah, I will say that is worrying, but also Trump is one of the good things about Trump being who he is. One of the good things is that he doesn't really have any principles. So if like some fucking tech guy, Mark Andreessen comes up to him like the church, the Catholics, or whatever it's called, what is it called, the cathedral? Oh yeah, it's the cathedral and the neo-humanist, Platonist. But he's gonna be like, shut up! I don't even know what you're saying. So how much is it? And because so much of it is like based on the capriciousness of this idiot. Like, how much is that ideology actually influencing the
That is interesting. Yeah, that is true. Like Mussolini actually kind of was like the more intellectual and well-read one, whereas like his guys were like the dumbasses who he had to like.
See, it's kind of the reverse. So
yeah, because like it's funny that he's like giving a speech where it's like the individual must flourish in the hierarchy, and we will restore true right, and they're just like, what are you talking about? I want to go crack some heads.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Nick Fuentes is like, yo, let's read like fucking 18th century reactionaries against.
Yeah, Nick Fuentes is like, let's read Alistair McIntyre and re-envision Catholic virtue ethics in order.
Yeah,
to
and Trump is like, what are you? I don't know any of those words. So that's another thing. Is it's kind of like you can have a bunch of people floating around with ideas, but insofar as there's no kind of lightning rod through which to strike those ideas at, it's kind of like, well,
and that's kind of what makes Trump an ideal Bonapartist figure, though, is because like he can balance all these different people basically. And
I will say this: it is very worrying that extremely reactionary and neo-fascistic strains of thought are becoming more commonplace amongst a right-wing vanguard. Before, it was kind of just like read libertarian trash. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, just wait for war with China and we get defeated by China. That's what I think is really going to be. That's what I'm really scared about, is when the inevitable war with China happens and we get our ass kicked.
Well, that would be.
That is where real fascism.
That would be cataclysmic, honestly.
That would be nuclear Armageddon. So, as we say, bite the shit. I really hope not. Because
that's what I think that like the kind of elements of that lead to the kind of total dictatorship of capital, through a militant nationalist movement that we're seeing, or the cauldron is there. The kind of crisis that can lead at the breaking out is I think on the horizon, and that's why I think it's appropriate to kind of talk about fascism right now. Maybe not like be hysterical about it, not try to do popular frontism 2.0, because I don't even think that's like applicable today. I think we need to think about the modern day political terrain, the technological terrain that we're in, and I think we need to we need to be 21st century thinkers about this. But
no, I mean, listen, I agree. There's some, like, as I said, the strongest analytical point in making these analogies is trying to determine or generalize some kind of trend in the crisis dynamics of capitalism. And there is this, not only is there, the capitalist state and society can no longer remain in equilibrium. And so capitalism, so to speak, conjures up fascism to sort of keep things in check. But not just that, there's also this dynamic where capitalist competition means that there might be a nation that's hegemonic for a while, but eventually another nation gets to that level. And it seems like in the history of capitalism of the 20th century, that the only way one really ends up overtaking the other is through world war. Right. And so thankfully, the dynamic is unconscious, but thankfully the American ruling class is not strategic enough, I think, to really recognize this, or maybe I think some elements do. But, that is very worrying. I mean, eventually China is going to be here and America is going to have to take the gamble world war to keep them down or let them defeat America economically, because that is what's going to happen. So, in a way, they already have won economically. So that is extremely worrying. If they end up developing self-conscious agents of capital in the U.S. that are willing to take that gamble, and then the rest of the human race is fucked. This is another thing about people always talking shit about, Stalin killed X, and he's a fucking criminal. Don't get me wrong, but you just think about the pure meat mincer that was the 20th century, just in the world wars. That is not the fault of socialists. That was a meat mincer.
So terrifying.
That was the competition of imperialist states, trying to gain hegemonic positions politically and in capitalist terms. That was a meat mincer.
I'm just not confident enough that like the post-war architecture that we created is going to infinitely contain those imperialist contradictions. I think
you didn't create shit, bro. What are you talking? I didn't create shit, bro.
You get the royal we.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
We're citizens of the United States here, okay?
Yeah, but in terms of like whether it's containing inter-imperialist rivalries, it's already demonstrably not doing that. You can already see that it's flaring back up.
America also, the Gaza genocide, I think, has basically given the green light for racial ethnic cleansing is completely fine now.
That's actually a really good point. The return of genocide as like an active political process, something we haven't seen since the early 20th century. Yeah. I guess
Yeah. Well, we've seen genocides, but the West has always been like, well, that's bad.
Yeah, right. It's always been an act of condemnation. Now it's sort of like.
Well, let's be honest. There has also been in effect genocidal behavior.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there haven't been genocide, but what I'm saying is
what do you call sanctions on Iraq that kill hundreds of thousands of children?
Right. Yeah, but legally, officially recognized genocides.
Yeah.
Because the war in Vietnam, what we did to Vietnam, we quote unquote. That was a genocide. Don't get me wrong.
I didn't do shit, bro. Yeah, you fucking throwing me in there. My fucking ancestors were getting brutalized by the flag.
What the United States did to Vietnam, that was genocide, but was it recognized by the international laws as genocide? No. But Gaza
defended as such, right? Now we have an open defense of genocide. That's a qualitative difference.
It kind of
that is reminiscent of the early 20th century.
No, yeah, I agree with that. Operation Rolling Thunder was in effect genocidal.
Yeah.
Burning Vietnamese civilians, throwing white phosphorus at Vietnamese civilians, land mining the whole country.
The free fire zones that they were using in Vietnam were basically same kind of thing that they use in Gaza, where basically killing anything that moves.
Yeah. Oh wow. Breaking news: Biden has cancer. This guy cannot catch a break.
Yeah. Well, I hope it takes him out quickly enough.
Yeah, me too.
Because honestly, fuck that guy.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
Fuck Joe Biden. It's so hard. I hate that guy so much.
That guy sucks. I hope he rots in hell.
He is going to go down in history as one of the worst presidents ever.
Dog, he's going to go down in history as a buffoon, which is
the buffoon who basically, you know,
he'll be our Hindenburg.
Complicit in a genocide and then basically handed the country over to the dumbest fucking fascist goon dipshit ever.
Yeah, I mean, we're really, yeah, I mean, I guess.
Close enough. Welcome back, Hindenburg.
Yeah, basically. I mean, you know, this is the president the Democrats deserve, you know? I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
You know, like what did they don't, you know, what they just entitled to win? What? No, put forward a program. You can't just say the other guy's bad. It's not a program.
Yeah, it's not a program. Just talking about saving democracy when the country really doesn't have functioning democracy, doesn't work.
Yeah. And like fucking, you know, what, none of them have any swag. I mean, Trump is a piece of human filth.
Swag on his bitches, all of them.
But he's way more charismatic than like the mummy that is Biden. I mean, you know, what is it? President Trump. Like, he's just saying nonsense. He's literally saying gibberish. You want like a random word generator to like somehow like convince people to like vote against someone? I mean, come on, it's a joke. Yeah, I mean, listen, it's worth finding a funny clip so we can leave on a note that isn't like we're all going to die in a world war.
I can play the little pump one.
That's why people love our show.
Yeah, a true went to Harvard. A true.
How the fuck you expect me to act? Soul crack and some old Air Max. I told straps cause I'm always solo. Big stick, it look like I'm polo. Dick, 50 shots in the dick. He got knocked out his fit, knocked out his shoes. He got knocked out his kick.
Hell yeah. There you go.
Good shit. Good shit.
Okay, thanks, comrades, for joining our stream. I think that was an ambitious, well-researched stream. I mean, that's my opinion, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, that was really fun. I had a great time doing that.
So as always, check out our Patreon, Cosmonaut Magazine. Check out our website if you still read books.
If you read, you know,
yeah,
hopefully you do. If you don't, you should consider it.
Check out, the Cosmopod. We have a podcast that does kind of more in-depth analysis and research on various issues. And please share this stream with your people.
And try to watch it on YouTube or Twitch, and get in the super chats. Get people to post in the chat and get.
Yeah, tell your grandma about us. Tell your mom. Tell your dad.
Tell everyone. Spread the good word.
Someone tell Hassan about us so we can feed off his clout.
Yeah, I saw your kicks, Hassan. They're not good. I can teach you to kick if you would.
Let's get some fucking Hassan numbers in here.
Yeah, we can train. We'll train Hassan, and then unleash him on our enemies. Okay, everyone. Thank you.
I see. How do you feel about this action today with all your things out in the street?
I hope that the communists blow you people up, man. You dig? That's where I am.